The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weathered trading post, and Katherine Owens pressed her trembling hand against the dusty window, trying to steady her racing heart as she stared at the strange, harsh landscape of Mineral Park, Arizona Territory, where everything looked sharp enough to cut, and nothing resembled the green hills of Pennsylvania she had left behind. The year was 1881, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, carrying nothing but 2 worn carpetbags and a faded photograph of someone who claimed to be a successful rancher named Ethan Dalton. The letters had been kind, almost tender in their simplicity, promising her a home and security in exchange for companionship and help managing a sprawling cattle ranch. At 23 years old, with both parents gone and her brother's wife making it abundantly clear there was no room for her in their household, Katherine had seen the advertisement and responded with a desperation she tried hard to disguise as practical thinking. Now, stepping down from the stagecoach onto the hard, packed earth, she wondered if desperation had made her foolish rather than practical. The July heat hit her like a physical force, so different from the humid summers back east. Everything seemed bleached by the sun, buildings constructed from rough-hewn wood that had weathered to gray, the mountains in the distance looking like they were carved from copper and rust. Miss Owens. A deep voice made her turn, and she found herself looking up at a man who bore only a passing resemblance to the photograph she had studied so many times during the long journey west. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered beneath a work-worn shirt, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of weathered oak. His face was harder too, lined in ways the photograph had not captured, though he could not have been more than 30 years old. A scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. "Yes," she managed, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "Mr. Dalton." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and something in his expression softened. "Ethan, please." "Welcome to Mineral Park, Miss Owens. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "Katherine," she said, because if they were to be married within the week as his last letter had suggested, formality seemed almost absurd. "And the journey was long, but I am here safely." He reached for her bags, and she noticed the rough calluses on his hands, the way his knuckles bore the small scars of a man who worked with rope and leather and stubborn animals. These were not the hands of a gentleman farmer. These were the hands of a man who knew hard labor intimately. "My wagon is just there," he said, nodding toward a sturdy buckboard hitched to 2 patient horses. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. We can stop at the hotel if you would prefer to rest first, or if you would rather wait until tomorrow for the journey." Katherine looked around at the dusty street, the handful of rough buildings, the saloon already emanating the smell of whiskey despite the early hour. A man leaned against a post outside the general store, watching her with undisguised interest. Another stood in the shadow of the livery stable, his hand resting on the gun at his hip in a way that seemed habitual rather than threatening, but still made her pulse quicken. "I would prefer to see my new home," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "If that is acceptable to you." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "That suits me fine. Let me get your bags loaded." As he turned away, a woman emerged from the general store, her dress dusty but her bearing confident. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and when she saw Katherine, she hurried over with a directness that seemed characteristic of this harsh land. "You must be the mail-order bride," she said without preamble, though her tone was not unkind. "I am Marjorie Sullivan. My husband runs the trading post. Ethan Dalton is a good man, but his ranch is isolated, and life out here is not easy for women accustomed to civilization. Katherine felt a flash of irritation at the assumption. I grew up on a farm, Mrs. Sullivan. I am not afraid of hard work. Hard work is one thing, Marjorie said, her eyes searching Katherine's face. Loneliness is another. The Dalton Ranch is 10 miles from town, and in winter, you might not see another soul for weeks at a time besides Ethan and his ranch hands. I just wanted you to know that if you need anything, if you ever need to come to town, you send word and my husband will come fetch you. There was something in the woman's tone that made Katherine's unease deepen, but before she could ask what Marjorie meant, Ethan returned, his expression shuddering slightly when he saw the two women talking. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said politely, but with a clear note of dismissal. "Mr. Dalton," Marjorie replied, then turned back to Katherine. "Remember what I said, dear. You are not alone out here, even when it feels that way." The ride out of Mineral Park took them north along a rutted trail that wound between scrub brush and mesquite trees. The landscape was beautiful in its own harsh way, all vast skies and distant mountains, but Katherine could not shake the nervous flutter in her stomach. She sat on the wagon bench beside Ethan, acutely aware of his presence, the way he handled the reins with easy competence, the silence that stretched between them. "Mrs. Sullivan means well," he finally said as the last buildings of the town disappeared behind them. "But she has a tendency to alarm newcomers unnecessarily." "She seemed concerned about the isolation," Katherine said carefully. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horses. "It is isolated," he admitted. "I will not lie to you about that. My nearest neighbor is 5 miles east, and he is not the friendliest man. The town is far enough that it takes planning to make the trip. But the land is good, the ranch is profitable, and I have 3 men who work for me year-round. You will not be completely alone." "But I will be alone with you," Katherine said, and then flushed at how that sounded. "I mean, we are strangers, Mr. Dalton. Ethan. Your letters were kind, but letters only reveal so much." He glanced at her then, and she saw something raw in his expression before he looked away again. "You are afraid of me." It was not a question, but Katherine answered anyway. "I am afraid of the unknown," she said honestly. "I am afraid of having made a terrible mistake. I am afraid that I will not be what you need, or that this life will break me. But I am trying not to let fear make my decisions." "That is fair," he said quietly. The wagon creaked and swayed over the uneven ground. "I will make you a promise, Katherine. I will never harm you, never force you to anything you do not want. We will marry when you are ready, not before. I have a small cabin near the main house where you can stay until then. It was built for my mother when my father was alive, before they both died of fever 8 years ago. It is yours for as long as you need it." The tightness in Katherine's chest eased slightly. "Thank you," she said. "That is generous." "It is decent," he corrected. "You came all this way on faith. The least I can do is give you time to know me before binding yourself legally." They rode in silence for a while longer, and Katherine found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. His profile was strong, angular in the harsh sunlight. He was not handsome in a refined way, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that she found herself drawn to despite her nervousness. "Why a mail-order bride?" she asked suddenly. "Surely there are women in the territory who would marry a successful rancher." His jaw tightened. "There are not many unmarried women in Mineral Park, and those who tend to prefer men who spend their time in town rather than out on the range. I tried courting a woman 2 years ago. She visited the ranch once and never returned, said it was too lonely, too hard, that she could not imagine raising children so far from society." "That must have hurt," Katherine said softly. "It was honest," he replied. "I respect honesty. That is why I turned to letters instead. I wanted a woman who knew what she was coming to, who chose this life with open eyes rather than discovering too late that she could not bear it. "And you think I can bear it?" Katherine asked. He looked at her fully then, and she saw something almost vulnerable in his expression. "I think you are brave enough to try. That is more than most would do." The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, and Katherine felt her breath catch. It was larger than she had imagined, sprawling across a valley between low hills. The main house was built of adobe and wood, single-storied but substantial, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property. A large barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and a smaller cabin set slightly apart from the main house, nestled beneath a trio of cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. "That is the cabin I mentioned," Ethan said, pointing. "It has its own well, a small fireplace, and I had the men clean it thoroughly when I got your telegram saying you were coming." As they drew closer, Katherine could see cattle grazing in the distance, their shapes dark against the golden grass. A man emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. He was older than Ethan, grizzled and bowlegged in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback. "That is Jack Porter," Ethan said. "He has worked for me since my father's time. The other two hands, Miguel and Frank, are out with the herd, but you will meet them at supper. We all eat together in the main house." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the cabin, and Ethan jumped down, then turned to offer Katherine his hand. She took it, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers, and stepped down into her new life. The cabin was simple but clean, one main room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain. A small table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, and a trunk for storage. Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the table, their bright yellow petals cheerful in the dim interior. "It is not much," Ethan said, setting her bags down carefully, "but it is private and secure. I will be in the main house if you need anything. Supper is at 6. You are welcome to join us, or I can bring you a plate if you would rather rest tonight." Katherine looked around at the space that would be hers, feeling an unexpected rush of gratitude. After months of living in her brother's house, always aware that she was an imposition, this tiny cabin felt like a sanctuary. "I will join you for supper," she said. "I would like to meet the men I will be living among." Ethan nodded, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and reaching his eyes. "They are good men. Rough around the edges but respectful. They know you are here as my intended, and they will treat you accordingly." After he left, Katherine sank down onto the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the long journey finally catch up with her. The mattress was straw but clean, covered with a quilt that had been mended many times but was still serviceable. Through the small window, she could see the main house, smoke beginning to curl from its chimney as someone started preparing the evening meal. She thought about Ethan's promise, about the cabin he had provided without hesitation, about the honesty in his voice when he spoke of his failed courtship. He was not what she had expected, but then, she probably was not what he had expected either. Her letters had been carefully written to emphasize her practical skills and downplay her fears, her loneliness, the desperation that had driven her west. Rising, she unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 good dresses on pegs driven into the wall, arranging her hairbrush and mirror on the small shelf near the wash basin. The mundane task steadied her, gave her something to do with her hands while her mind raced ahead to supper, to the coming days, to the question of when, and how she would know if she could truly marry this stranger. A knock on the door startled her as the sun touched the horizon. She opened it to find a young man, perhaps 19 or 20, with a dark complexion and kind eyes, holding a pitcher of water. "Pardon, miss," he said, his English carrying the melodic accent of Spanish. "I am Miguel. Boss thought you might need fresh water for washing before supper." "Thank you," Katherine said, taking the pitcher. "That is very thoughtful." Miguel ducked his head shyly. "We are glad you are here, miss. Boss has been alone too long. It is good for him to have company." Before Katherine could respond, he had already turned and was walking back toward the bunkhouse, his long strides eating up the distance. She watched him go, touched by the simple kindness, then returned inside to wash the dust of travel from her face and hands. The main house was warm and welcoming when she arrived precisely at 6, the smell of cooking meat and beans making her stomach growl with sudden hunger. Ethan met her at the door, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt that looked relatively new. "Come in," he said. "Everyone is eager to meet you." The interior of the house surprised her. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but while the furniture was simple and clearly handmade, everything was well maintained and clean. A large table dominated the main room, already set with mismatched plates and cups. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, and a cook stove occupied one corner, where a man was stirring something in a large pot. "That is Frank," Ethan said. "He is the best cook among us, which is not saying much, but he keeps us fed." Frank turned, revealing a weathered face that could have been anywhere from 40 to 60, with pale blue eyes and thinning blonde hair. "Madam," he said, wiping his hand on his apron before offering it to shake. "Welcome to the Dalton Ranch. I hope you like beef stew because that is about all I know how to make that does not taste like leather." Katherine shook his hand, charmed despite herself by his blunt manner. "I am sure it will be delicious, and please call me Katherine." "Katherine it is," Frank said. "Though you should know I might forget and call you miss or madam anyway. Old habits." Jack came in from outside, removing his hat to reveal a mostly bald head ringed with gray hair. He nodded to Katherine with grave courtesy. "Miss Owens, it is a pleasure to have a lady at the ranch again. Reminds me of when Ethan's mother was alive. She could manage this whole operation with just a look and a word." Miguel entered last, taking a seat at the far end of the table with the same shy courtesy he had shown earlier. As they all sat down, Katherine found herself at Ethan's right hand, the place of honor she supposed, though it made her acutely aware of his presence beside her. The meal was simple but plentiful, the stew thick with beef and vegetables, accompanied by fresh bread that Frank admitted he had bought in town rather than attempting to bake. The men ate with the hunger of those who worked hard physically, but their table manners were better than Katherine had expected, and the conversation was surprisingly easy. They asked her about her journey, about Pennsylvania, about what had brought her west. She answered as honestly as she could without dwelling on the sadness of her situation, and found that they listened with genuine interest. In turn, they told her about the ranch, about the spring roundup they had just completed, about the challenges of raising cattle in the Arizona territory where water was scarce and rustlers were a constant concern. "We run about 500 head, Ethan explained. "It is not the biggest operation in the territory, but it is profitable. The land is deeded, not just claimed, which means we have legal protection that many ranchers lack. My father was careful about that." "You ever have trouble?" Katherine asked. Mrs. Sullivan in town seemed to suggest that the isolation could be dangerous. The men exchanged glances, and Katherine saw something pass between them, some shared knowledge that they were deciding whether to tell her. "There has been some trouble with rustlers," Ethan admitted finally. "Nothing serious yet, but we have lost a few head over the past months, and there is a man named Carson who has the ranch to the east. He has been pressuring me to sell, claims the water rights are unclear, though they are not. He is more nuisance than threat, but I will not lie and say there is no danger out here. This is still rough country in many ways. I appreciate your honesty, Katherine said quietly. She looked around the table at the 4 men who would be her companions in this isolated place, and felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. They were rough, yes, and this life would be hard in ways she could not yet imagine, but there was a fundamental decency in them that she recognized. After supper, Miguel and Frank volunteered to clean up, and Jack excused himself to check on a mare that was due to foal any day. Ethan walked Katherine back to her cabin, the night air cool and filled with unfamiliar sounds, insects and distant animal calls that she could not identify. "Thank you for supper," she said when they reached her door. "Your men are kind." "They are good men," Ethan agreed. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking uncertain in a way that made him seem younger. "Katherine, I know this is all strange and frightening. I want you to know that there is no rush on anything. Take your time, learn the ranch, learn me. If you decide this is not the life for you, I will pay for your passage back east. No hard feelings." She studied his face in the starlight, seeing the sincerity there. "You would truly let me go?" "Even after paying for my passage here and the cabin and all of this, I want a partner," he said simply. "Not a prisoner. My parents had a true partnership, worked this ranch side by side for 20 years before the fever took them. That is what I am looking for. If we cannot build that together, then it is better to know now than after we are legally bound." Impulsively, Katherine reached out and touched his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. "I am not planning to run," she said. "I am planning to try. That is all I can promise right now." His hand came up to cover hers, warm and gentle despite the calluses. "That is all I ask." She went inside feeling lighter than she had in months and fell asleep to the sound of coyotes singing in the distant hills, no longer afraid. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that Katherine found surprisingly comfortable. She woke each morning to the sound of the men moving around the ranch, tending to the endless work that keeping 500 head of cattle required. Ethan had made it clear that she was not expected to work, that her only job was to settle in and decide if she could make a life here. But Katherine had never been good at idleness. She started small, offering to help Frank with the cooking. He accepted with obvious relief, admitting that while he could manage stew and beans, anything more complicated was beyond him. Katherine took over breakfast, waking early to make eggs and bacon, biscuits that were flaky and golden, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The men's appreciation was obvious and vocal, and she felt a warm satisfaction in their praise. From there, she expanded her territory. The main house needed a woman's touch, and with Ethan's permission, she set about cleaning and organizing. She washed curtains that had not been washed in years, scrubbed floors, aired out rooms. In town on their weekly supply run, she bought fabric and made new cushions for the chairs, picked up a few small luxuries like proper soap and lamp oil that did not smell like burning animals. Ethan watched her transform his house with an expression she could not quite read, something between gratitude and wonder. He was careful never to assume, never to act as though her presence was permanent, but she caught him sometimes looking at her with such naked hope that it made her chest ache. She was learning him in these quiet weeks, learning that he was up before dawn every day, that he worked as hard as any of his men, but never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. Learning that he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, that he was patient with the animals and fair in his dealings, that he read books in the evening by lamplight, surprising her with his love of poetry and history. "My mother taught me," he explained one night when she commented on the small shelf of books in the main room. "She was a school teacher before she married my father. She believed that a man could work with his hands and still exercise his mind." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Katherine said. "She was," Ethan replied, his voice soft with memory. "She would have liked you. You remind me of her, actually. That same practical strength, the way you just see what needs doing and do it without complaint." Katherine felt herself flush with pleasure at the comparison. She was growing comfortable with Ethan, she realized. Comfortable with his presence, with the way he moved through the house, with the sound of his voice. More than comfortable, if she was being honest with herself. She was developing feelings that went well beyond simple gratitude or friendship. It was the small things that got to her. The way he always made sure she had the best cut of meat at supper. The way he had fixed the window in her cabin when she mentioned it stuck, appearing the next morning with tools and working until it opened smoothly. The way he spoke to her, like her opinions mattered, asking her advice about everything from which bull to keep for breeding to whether he should plant a garden near the house. "I know nothing about cattle," she protested once. "But you have good sense," he countered. And sometimes an outside perspective sees things those of us close to it miss. One evening, nearly a month after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch of the main house watching the sun set over the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that still took Katherine's breath away. The question that had been building in her mind finally spilled out. "Ethan, why did you choose me? There must have been other women who responded to your advertisement." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the horizon. "There were 3 other responses," he admitted. One woman was clearly only interested in the money she thought a rancher must have. She listed all the things she expected me to provide. One was so young, barely 18, and her letter read like she was looking for adventure rather than a life. And one never wrote back after my first response. "And my letter," Katherine prompted. "Your letter was honest," he said simply. "You did not pretend to be something you were not. You were clear about your situation, about why you were seeking a new start. You asked questions about the work, about what I would expect from a wife. You wanted to know if there were other families nearby, if there was a church, practical things that told me you were thinking seriously about actually living here, not just escaping your old life." "I was escaping, though," Katherine admitted. "My brother made it clear I was not welcome. I had no prospects, no money of my own. I was desperate." "Desperate, maybe," Ethan said, turning to look at her. "But not foolish. You could have responded to any number of advertisements. You chose mine because something in my letter spoke to you, just as something in yours spoke to me." "What did you write in your letters to the others?" she asked curiously. "The same things I wrote to you," he said. "About the ranch, about the work, about what I was looking for. I think perhaps they just did not want what I was offering, except you." Katherine felt her heart beat faster. "And what were you offering?" "A partnership," he said. "A life built together, honest work and honest dealing, respect, companionship." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "The possibility of love if we were fortunate." "And are we fortunate?" Katherine whispered. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gentle, deliberate touch. "I think I am falling in love with you, Katherine Owens. I think I have been since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, looking terrified but determined. I think I fell a little more when you did not run after seeing how isolated the ranch is, and more again when you started making this house into a home. I fall more every morning when I wake up knowing you are here, every evening when we sit like this and talk. So yes, I think we might be fortunate." Katherine felt tears sting her eyes. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I am afraid of how much I am starting to care for you. I told myself I would be practical, that this was an arrangement, but it does not feel like an arrangement anymore." "What does it feel like?" Ethan asked. "Like coming home," she said. "Like I have been searching for something my whole life and did not know it until I found it here with you." He stood, drawing her up with him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then, slowly, carefully, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle, almost reverent, and Katherine felt something in her chest crack open, spilling warmth through her entire body. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me, Katherine? Not because of letters or arrangements, but because you want to. Because you want to build a life here with me." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 days later in Mineral Park, with Judge Matthews presiding and the whole town turning out to witness. Marjorie Sullivan cried, admitting she had worried Katherine would bolt, and several townspeople commented that they had never seen Ethan smile so much. The ceremony was simple, but when Ethan slipped his mother's wedding ring onto Katherine's finger, his hands were shaking with emotion. "I had it sized," he murmured. "I hoped, even though I tried not to assume." Katherine kissed him in front of everyone, causing a few scandalized gasps and a lot of laughter. She did not care. This man was her husband now, her partner, and she was tired of hiding her feelings. The ranch hands had decorated the main house with wildflowers and ribbons in their absence, and Frank had attempted a cake that was lopsided but tasted sweet. They celebrated with music, Jack revealing a surprising talent on the harmonica, while Miguel sang ballads in Spanish that sounded beautiful even though Katherine understood only half the words. That night, alone in the main house, Katherine went to Ethan with her heart pounding but no fear. He was patient and gentle, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Katherine understood for the first time what people meant when they spoke of two becoming one. It was not just physical, though that was wonderful in ways she had not imagined. It was emotional, spiritual, a joining that went deeper than bodies. Afterwards, lying in his arms, she traced the scar on his jaw that she had noticed that first day. "How did you get this?" she asked. "A bull caught me when I was 22, he said. "Gored me pretty badly. Jack thought I might die, but my mother nursed me through it. She said I was too stubborn to die." "I am glad you are stubborn," Katherine murmured and felt his chest shake with silent laughter. "So am I," he said, kissing the top of her head. "So am I." The next months were the happiest of Katherine's life. She fell completely into the rhythm of ranch life, learning to ride so she could accompany Ethan when he checked on the cattle, helping with the branding during the fall roundup, working side by side with the men during harvest when they cut and stored hay for the winter months. The work was hard, harder than anything she had done back east, but it was satisfying in a way that her old life had never been. She also began to make connections beyond the ranch. Marjorie Sullivan became a good friend, and through her, Katherine met other women in the area. There were not many, but those who existed formed a tight-knit community, helping each other through the challenges of frontier life. Katherine joined the church auxiliary, helped organize a school for the few children in the area, and found herself becoming part of the fabric of Mineral Park society. But it was on the ranch with Ethan that she was happiest. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing their pasts, their dreams, their fears. He told her about growing up with the weight of the ranch on his shoulders after his parents died, about the loneliness that had driven him to seek a mail-order bride. She told him about her parents' deaths, about the cold welcome in her brother's house, about the fear that she would never find a place where she truly belonged. "You belong here," Ethan told her fiercely. "With me. Always. In late October, trouble arrived in the form of Carson, the neighboring rancher Ethan had mentioned. He rode up to the house one afternoon with 3 men, all armed, and demanded to speak with Ethan. Katherine watched from the window, her hands clenched, as the 2 men faced off in the yard. "I am making a final offer, Dalton," Carson said, loud enough that she could hear every word. "Sell me your water rights or I will take them." "Those rights are mine legally," Ethan replied, his voice calm but hard, "and they are not for sale at any price." "You are making a mistake," Carson said. "I have lawyers who will tie you up in court for years. I have men who can make your life very difficult. Be smart and take my offer." "Get off my land," Ethan said quietly, "and do not come back unless you want to meet the sheriff." Carson's face darkened with rage, but he must have seen something in Ethan's stance, in the way Jack and Miguel had appeared from the barn with rifles, because he turned his horse and left without another word, his men following. Ethan came inside, his face drawn with tension, and Katherine went to him immediately. "Will he really take you to court?" she asked. "He can try," Ethan said. "But the water rights are clearly documented. My father made sure of that." Carson is a bully who has gotten used to getting his way through intimidation. He will move on to easier targets soon enough. But Carson did not move on. Over the following weeks, small troubles began to plague the ranch. Fences were cut, allowing cattle to wander. A watering hole was fouled with trash, making it unusable. Tools disappeared from the barn. Nothing major, nothing that could be definitively tied to Carson, but enough to create constant irritation and extra work. Ethan reported it to the sheriff, who promised to investigate but admitted he had no proof. "Carson is careful," Sheriff Miller said. "Unless you catch him or his men in the act, there is not much I can do." The tension wore on everyone. The men took turns keeping watch at night, and Ethan taught Katherine to shoot, insisting she know how to defend herself if necessary. She proved a decent shot, and the Colt revolver he gave her became a constant presence on her hip when she worked around the ranch. In early December, things came to a head. Ethan and Jack were out checking the herd when they spotted 3 of Carson's men driving off a dozen head of Dalton cattle. The confrontation was brief but violent. Shots were fired, though thankfully no one was hit, and Carson's men fled when Ethan and Jack stood their ground. This time, there was proof. The cattle were clearly marked with the Dalton brand, and Sheriff Miller had no choice but to arrest Carson's men. Carson himself denied any knowledge, claiming his men had acted on their own initiative, but the pressure on the Dalton ranch ceased immediately. "He knows he went too far," Ethan told Katherine that night as they lay in bed, his arm around her shoulders. "Rustling is a hanging offense. He will not risk his neck over water rights, no matter how valuable they are." "I was so afraid," Katherine admitted. "When you came back and told me there had been shooting, I thought my heart would stop." "I am sorry," he said, kissing her temple. "I never wanted you to worry." "That is part of loving someone," she replied. "The worry, the fear, the relief when they come home safe. I am learning to accept it." "You should not have to accept violence and danger," Ethan said roughly. "You came here for a better life, not this." Katherine rose up on one elbow, looking down at him in the lamplight. "I came here for a life with you," she said firmly. "Whatever that entails. You told me that first day, fear nothing with me beside you. I choose to believe that, Ethan. I choose you, all of you, including the hard parts and the dangerous parts." He pulled her down for a kiss that was fierce and grateful, and in the loving that followed, Katherine felt their bond deepen even further. The trouble with Carson ended with a whimper rather than a bang. His men were convicted of rustling and sentenced to prison. Carson sold his ranch and left the territory, unable to maintain his operation without the additional water he had been trying to steal. Ethan bought the land at auction, nearly doubling the size of his holdings and securing water rights that would sustain the ranch for generations. "We did it," he told Katherine, holding the deed in his hands. "We not only survived, we thrived. We make a good team," she said, smiling. Christmas that year was the first Katherine had celebrated with true joy in longer than she could remember. She and Ethan rode into town for the church service, then returned to the ranch for a feast that Frank and Miguel had been preparing for days. The men gave her small, thoughtful gifts: a new riding glove from Jack to replace the one she had worn through, a beautiful carved box from Miguel for her sewing supplies, a Dutch oven from Frank so she could bake bread more easily. Ethan's gift took her breath away. It was a locket, delicate gold that must have cost more than he could easily afford, with a tiny photograph inside of the two of them taken in town after their wedding. "So you can always carry us with you," he said softly as he fastened it around her neck. "I do not need a locket for that," she whispered. "You are written on my heart." In February, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, then he whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop before she got dizzy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though his reaction made the question almost unnecessary. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, kneeling down to press his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know." Katherine ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. "We are going to be a family," she said. "We are already a family," he corrected, looking up at her with eyes bright with emotion. "This just makes it bigger." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Katherine continued to work around the ranch until Ethan finally put his foot down in her 7th month, insisting she rest more. She chafed at the restriction but had to admit she was tired in a way she had never been before, her body working hard to grow their child. Marjorie Sullivan visited often, bringing advice and supplies, helping Katherine prepare for the birth. A midwife was engaged, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered most of the babies in Mineral Park over the past 20 years. In early September, Katherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan, pacing outside the bedroom door, feared he would lose her. But Katherine was strong, and with Mrs. Henderson's skill and Marjorie's support, she delivered a healthy baby boy just after dawn. When Ethan was finally allowed into the room, he found his wife exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him with a smile that was pure joy. "Meet your son," she said. Ethan approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so small and perfect. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. When Katherine placed him in Ethan's arms, the baby opened his eyes, revealing the same oak-brown color as his father's. "He is perfect," Ethan breathed. "You are amazing. I have never seen anything more beautiful than this." They named him James, after Ethan's father, with the middle name of Owen, a nod to Katherine's maiden name. Little James was doted on by everyone on the ranch, with Jack carving him toys, Miguel singing him Spanish lullabies, and Frank declaring himself honorary uncle and chief protector. Katherine found that motherhood suited her. She loved the weight of James in her arms, the sweet smell of him, the way he looked at her with such trust and need. Ethan was a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, helping with feedings when Katherine was exhausted. "This is everything I dreamed of," Katherine told him one night as they watched their son sleep in the cradle Ethan had built with his own hands. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. "I thought I would live my whole life alone, married to the ranch." "You changed everything, Katherine. You gave me a real home, a family, a reason to build something that lasts beyond just running cattle." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Ethan's careful management and the additional land from Carson's former holdings meant they could expand the herd. They hired 2 more ranch hands, built a new barn, and began raising horses as well as cattle. Katherine kept the books, managed the household, and became known throughout the territory as a gracious hostess and savvy businesswoman. When James was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was no easier, she faced it with more confidence. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma, was born in the spring, smaller and quieter than her brother had been, with Katherine's auburn hair and Ethan's serious eyes. The years that followed were full and busy. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already learning the ways of the ranch. Emma was more thoughtful, content to sit with Katherine and watch the world, taking everything in with solemn observation. When James was 7 and Emma 4, Katherine gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Thomas and William. The ranch was chaos for a while, but it was joyful chaos, filled with the sound of children's laughter and the constant motion of a large, loving family. The children grew up knowing they were loved, that they belonged to something bigger than themselves. James learned to ride before he could read, taking to ranch work with natural skill. Emma surprised them all by showing a talent for numbers, keeping better books than Katherine by the time she was 10. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief, but charming their way out of trouble with matching grins. Through it all, Katherine and Ethan's love only deepened. They had built something remarkable together, a ranch that employed 15 men, ran 2,000 head of cattle, and bred some of the finest horses in the territory. But more than that, they had built a family, a legacy that would endure. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Katherine back to Mineral Park, to the spot where she had first stepped off the stagecoach, terrified and uncertain. "You remember?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "I remember being so afraid," she said, leaning into him. "I thought I had made a terrible mistake." "And now?" he asked. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made," she said. "Coming here, taking that leap of faith, trusting you. Everything good in my life came from that moment." "Fear nothing with me beside you," Ethan said softly, repeating the words he had said to her so many times over the years. "That is still true, Katherine, always." "I know," she replied, turning in his arms to kiss him. "I have never been afraid, not really, not since that first night when you promised me time and honesty and respect. You have given me so much more than that. You have given me everything." They stood there in the Arizona sun, 2 people who had found each other across thousands of miles and impossible odds, who had built a life of love and partnership and purpose. Around them, the town had grown, but the harsh beauty of the land remained unchanged, as constant as their devotion to each other. That evening, they returned to the ranch to find their children had planned a surprise celebration. The whole family gathered around the big table, now extended with extra leaves to accommodate everyone. Jack was there, gray-haired now but still spry at 70. Miguel had married a woman from town and brought his own 3 children. Frank, who claimed to be too old and set in his ways for marriage, was nevertheless a beloved presence, the children's favorite storyteller. As Katherine looked around at the faces she loved, at the life she and Ethan had created together, she felt such profound gratitude that it brought tears to her eyes. She had boarded that stagecoach 20 years ago with nothing but fear and hope, and she had found a home beyond her wildest dreams. Ethan caught her eye across the table and raised his glass in a private toast just for her. She raised hers in return, and in his eyes, she saw reflected all the love, all the joy, all the shared triumphs and trials that had brought them to this moment. After the celebration, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Katherine and Ethan sat on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, taking her hand. "I am thinking about beginnings," Katherine said. "How we can never know where a single decision will lead. If I had not answered your advertisement, if you had not chosen my letter, our children would not exist. This whole beautiful life would never have been." "But you did answer," Ethan said. "And I did choose you, and here we are." "Here we are," Katherine echoed, resting her head on his shoulder, "right where we are supposed to be." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened, two people who had been strangers once, bound now by years and love and the life they had built together. The ranch sprawled around them, testament to their hard work and partnership. Their children slept safely inside, the next generation who would carry on what they had started. Katherine thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, how she had clutched her bags and tried to be brave. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to be afraid, that everything would work out better than she could possibly imagine, that the stern-faced rancher who met her would become the love of her life, her partner in all things, the father of her children, her home. But perhaps it was better this way, she thought. Better to have lived through the fear and doubt, to have chosen love and trust every day, to have built something strong enough to weather any storm. The easy path taught nothing. It was the hard path, the one that required courage and faith and work, that led to true happiness. "I love you," she said to Ethan, simple words that carried the weight of 20 years. "I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." As the years continued to pass, the Dalton Ranch became legendary throughout the Arizona territory. James took over much of the day-to-day operations when he turned 25, proving himself a capable manager who had inherited his father's fairness and his mother's business acumen. Emma married a lawyer in Phoenix but returned often, always bringing her growing family to visit. The twins went into partnership together, starting a horse breeding operation that quickly gained renown for producing sturdy, intelligent animals. Katherine and Ethan stepped back from the daily running of the ranch, though they remained active and involved. They traveled a bit, visiting Emma in Phoenix, taking a trip to San Francisco that Katherine had always dreamed of, even venturing back east to Pennsylvania, so Ethan could see where Katherine had grown up. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together, to the home they had built. In their later years, they spent long afternoons on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, telling stories about the old days, about how they had met and fallen in love. "Tell us about when Grandma first came on the stagecoach," the grandchildren would beg, and Katherine and Ethan would share a smile before launching into the familiar story, each adding details the other forgot, finishing each other's sentences in the way of couples who have been together so long they think as one. Katherine never forgot those first words Ethan had said to her, the promise that had given her courage when she needed it most. "Fear nothing with me beside you." It had been true then, and it remained true through all the years that followed, through every challenge and triumph, every joy and sorrow. When Ethan was 72, he suffered a fall from his horse while out riding with James. The injuries were not immediately life-threatening, but he never fully recovered. Spending his final year mostly confined to the house he and Katherine had shared for nearly 5 decades. Katherine nursed him with the same devotion he had always shown her, and on quiet evenings, they would reminisce about their long life together, marveling at how blessed they had been. "I would do it all again," Ethan told her one night, his voice weak but his eyes still bright with love. "Every moment, every trial, every joy, all of it led me to you, and that made everything worthwhile. And I would answer your letter 1,000 times, Katherine replied, holding his hand. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. What more could anyone ask for?" Ethan passed peacefully in his sleep on a cool October night, with Katherine beside him and his children and grandchildren gathered near. The entire territory mourned his loss, for he had been respected and admired by all who knew him. Katherine grieved deeply, but not despairingly. She had been blessed with nearly 50 years by his side, and she carried those memories like treasures, polishing them in quiet moments, finding comfort in all they had shared. She remained at the ranch, still sharp and active even as she approached 80, a beloved matriarch who ruled her extended family with gentle firmness and abundant love. She lived to see her great-grandchildren born, to watch the ranch continue to prosper under James's leadership, to see Emma's son elected to the territorial legislature, to attend the twins' 50th birthday celebration. The world changed around her, the wild territory becoming a state, automobiles appearing on roads that had once known only horses, electricity coming to Mineral Park and eventually even to the ranch. But some things remained constant. The land still stretched vast and beautiful under the Arizona sun. The cattle still grazed on the hills. The family still gathered around the big table for celebrations. And in the main room, on a place of honor above the fireplace, hung a photograph of a young Katherine and Ethan on their wedding day, their faces bright with hope and love, a testament to all they had built together. Katherine Dalton passed away in her sleep at the age of 86, surrounded by family, her last words a whispered, "I am coming, my love." She was laid to rest beside Ethan on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of cottonwood trees that had grown tall and strong over the decades. The ranch continues still, run now by the 4th generation of Daltons, a thriving operation that stands as a monument to the courage of a frightened young woman who answered an advertisement, and the stern rancher who promised her she need fear nothing with him beside her. Their love story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with a single act of faith, that true love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that home is not a place but a person, a promise, a choice made every day to stand together against whatever the world might bring. In Mineral Park, now a faded ghost town that tourists visit to glimpse the Old West, a historical marker stands near where the stagecoach once stopped. It tells the story of Katherine Owens, mail-order bride, and Ethan Dalton, rancher, and the legacy they left behind. But the real story, the true measure of their lives, cannot be contained in words on a plaque. It lives on in the descendants who carry their names and their values, in the land they stewarded so carefully, in the example they set of what love and partnership can build when given time to grow. They started with nothing but letters and hope, two strangers taking a chance on each other. They built an empire, yes, but more importantly, they built a family, a love that transcended time and circumstance, a bond that death itself could not break. Their story began with fear and ended with legacy. Proof that the bravest thing any of us can do is open our hearts and trust that the risk of love is always, always worth taking. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the Arizona hills, some say you can still hear the echo of laughter from the old ranch house, the sound of children playing, the murmur of two voices on the porch, talking late into the night about everything and nothing, still together after all these years, still in love, still proving that the best stories never really end. They just grow richer with each retelling, each generation adding their own chapter to the tale of courage, faith, and enduring love that began when a frightened young woman stepped off a stagecoach and into the arms of her destiny.